Well, good afternoon. No, good morning. Good afternoon. I'm really happy to have you join us today as we are going to talk about tourism and travel, which is a particularly important sector for LGBTI people for many reasons, which we will discuss. With us today we have first of all Laurie Bone, who is director of trade, sales, and national training for Royal Caribbean International. I have had very good relationship with RCCL for a long time. In fact, Royal Caribbean was one of the first companies in the tourism industry to express support for the standards of conduct for business on LGBTI issues that I helped develop during my time at the United Nations. And during the discussion with Royal Caribbean, we spoke a lot about how travel and tourism can affect the fight for LGBTI equality globally. And that's something that I look forward to discussing with Laurie. And then we have my great friend, John Tanzella of the International Gay and Lesbian Tourism Association, the LGBT Tourism Association, which is based in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. John and I have known each other for a long time, and John always made sure that the annual convention of IGLTA had a section on the human rights of LGBTI people. IGLTA is very concerned with sustainability of travel and tourism, but it also looked at the interconnection of tourism and travel when it comes to the human rights of LGBTI people. And how, if you travel to a place where the human rights of LGBTI people are challenged, how can you contribute to ensure that you are participating in the process of social change? So I was at the conference that John organized in Toronto, and then last year it was in New York, a few steps from my apartment, which was very convenient. And then this year, 2 weeks ago, we were supposed to all be together with the Gay and Lesbian Travel Association in Milan. So I had my entire luggage was ready. I was looking forward to spending time with the boys in Corso Como, to buy shoes at Fratelli Rossetti, and then the entire convention basically had to be cancelled because of COVID-19. So it's definitely not Milan, but I'm still delighted to see both of you today. So let's jump into this conversation immediately. And so my first question will go to my dear friend John. We all know that the travel and tourism industry has been particularly hit by COVID-19 and the subsequent economic crisis. So I would love for you to tell us in a few minutes why it matters a lot to the LGBTI community, whether it is as travelers or as employees.
Sure, and it's a pleasure to be here. Like you said, we're not in Milan, unfortunately, for the IGLTA Global Convention, but it's great to connect with you and Laurie here on the video. But yeah, I think it's such an intricate part of our being in the LGBT community, and so many people in our community grow up in isolation. Even here in the United States, if they're growing up in small towns, they're not really able to be themselves. So the travel and hospitality industry was always sort of an outlet for them to be able to see the world, working for a cruise line, an airline, a hotel chain, whatever the case may be, and being able to get out of where they are and explore. We were talking about our convention. It is a global organization. We are based here in the United States and Florida, but our business members are in 82 countries. And at the Toronto convention 2 years ago that you mentioned, we had some attendees from Sri Lanka, who you know very well as well. And for them, it was eye-opening because they were with 700 other people that are like themselves and trying to do business with like-minded people. And to learn that there are LGBT leaders in tourism all over the world and different industries in tourism that come together at our convention. So for someone like our friends there that have a hard time just being able to get somebody in their country to create a website with same-sex couples, it seems so basic, but there's challenges. And so I think the travel industry has really been that outlet for people, here and everywhere to escape what they're dealing with at home or in their hometown. And, no matter where you are, when you get together with your friends, at a dinner party, the topic of travel always comes up. Where have you been lately? What's your next trip? What cruise have you been on? That always seems to come up in conversation. So I think it's just a fabric of our community as well, that it really matters to our community. And it's really a part of our community.
Yeah, I love that. When you mentioned that this is an outlet for us, we kind of need to leave our community.
Mm-hmm.
It's also true when you look at LGBTI employees in the industry, which is that a lot of us chose jobs that would get us to travel so that we could visit places that were more accepting, but also we could explore how LGBTI identities are navigated through the world. And one of the things that struck me in Toronto when you talk about those people that were running a guest house in Sri Lanka,
Mm-hmm.
their name is Fuzu Travels. They said to me, one of the positive impacts of having LGBT travelers is that the prejudice that my staff might have against LGBTI people is challenged when I have LGBT travelers in my guest house. And then this staff will go back to their family. And there, the perception of LGBTI people will be challenged too. And ultimately, it is the entire community that is affected. And so I think, one aspect that we should not forget is that this cultural exchange, which travel is, has an impact on the perception of LGBTI people and therefore contributes to social change.
And that applies, to places I've been in Africa, applies to places here in the United States, in small towns. So it's very applicable, very true.
So Laurie, I have to say that when you think about LGBTI employees being very represented in the industry, Royal Caribbean definitely comes to mind, and same thing around cruise consumers. We know that among cruise consumers, LGBTI people are a very strong segment. So it was a very joyful event when we had Royal Caribbean communicate around its stance on human rights of LGBTI people. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of Royal Caribbean in its relationship to the community, and in your opinion, why it is that the organization took that step of reiterating its commitment to human rights of LGBTI people?
Well, I'd be happy to, and thank you so much for having me here today, Fabrice, and really enjoying the opportunity to share with you some information. And the history of Royal, it's amazing. We're actually in our 51st year of sailing, and it's been an amazing ride for us. We are the largest individual cruise brand, and I really think that the strength and diversity in our company, the difference is what makes us so strong and so unique. And the fact that we have always been very supportive of all communities, whether it's our employees on board the ship and leadership on board the ship, whether it's our office-based employees, of course, our ever valuable travel advisors and travel partners that sell our cruises, and of course, our guests. No matter how you look at it, as far as diversity and inclusion, everybody in every aspect of who we are is a very important piece of who we are. And I don't think we would be the brand we are today without every component mentioned. Like I said, whether our guests, our employees, our crew on board, it's all really key to who and what we are. And we're a company that's grown. We continue to grow. We will survive Corona and the virus. We aren't sailing today, but we will be back, and we will be back with a vengeance and come back stronger. We're confident in that. So we really look forward to those days and leveraging that strength and our diversity as we find our way back cruising in this new world that we're in today.
So that's a very optimistic message. I love to hear that, Laurie. And we are going to talk about what the industry is doing once the deconfinement is taking place. But first of all, let's talk about the obvious, which is that cruisers took a huge hit in the news, meaning that a lot of the negative story about COVID-19 at the beginning were linked to cruisers. And so that's why there is a bit of this perception of COVID-19 and cruises being associated. I would love to hear from you what has been the impact of those negative news on the industry, and how, in particular, Royal Caribbean has been coping, which could be described as a communication crisis.
I'm happy to share that, Fabrice. What's interesting, we were just talking about safe environments, right? And feeling safe and escaping for travel. Well, we used to talk about it as far as just being on board, and now we talk about it as we think of coming back for all guests, right? How do we make them feel safe, and how do we make them feel secure? We were incredibly hard hit. Starting March 13th, we announced the suspension of our sailing fleet-wide, worldwide. And then 1 month later, we actually went home. Or actually, I'm sorry, 5 days later, we went home. The days are all running together for us now. But so by March 17th, every employee was working from home. The Port of Miami, for instance, which is our international headquarters, was completely shut down. And so we as an organization learned how to work remote very quickly for those that weren't already. And that was quite the ramp up. Since then, we've been dealing with a number of challenges, things like repatriating the crew, getting the crew home, which has been no simple task. We are almost there, and we actually had a leadership call this morning with our chairman and our brand presidents, and we laughed a little bit because we're just now getting the crew home, and we have high hopes that not too long from now, we'll need all the crew members to be coming back so that we can start setting sail again. But the industry has been hit hard. Royal Caribbean itself, internationally, lost 26% of its entire workforce. And we are learning to work and be lean and mean and even more productive as the team that is left to be there. And so we will come back. We are looking forward to getting back. But I think the most important thing we think about every day is how do we build confidence for our consumers that we hope to be speaking to and having them sail aboard our ships very soon. And then, of course, how do we keep the safety and security of everybody, whether it's our guests, of course, our crew, and of course, the employees here on land. It's really now about safety and security as a #1 priority.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to ask you a few more questions about concretely what it's going to mean when you step on the boat. But before that, I have to say that, John, your organization is not exactly the same size than Royal Caribbean, but it is also an organization that has been very important to our community, that has been around for a long time. I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about the origins of IGLTA, because it's a much older organization than most people think, and in many ways it is associated with the courage of our community. Say our sexual orientation, our gender identity also affect the way we travel. So I would love if you could tell us a little more about the organization, and also if you could tell us, as executive director, how you've been dealing with the crisis, because I assume that having to cancel Milan has had a gigantic cost to you, and I assume you have had to make hard decisions. So I would love to hear a little bit about this.
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting history. The organization was founded here in South Florida in 1983, so 37 years ago. And it was founded by 25 individuals in the tourism industry. They were travel advisors and gay guest house owners that were collaborating together with their clients to make sure they had a safe and welcoming travel experience. Because you think of the world in the United States in 1983 was very different than it is today for LGBT people. But if you fast forward 37 years, we're sort of doing the same thing, but on just a much larger, grander scale. We're still based in South Florida. We have staff in 7 countries, members now in 82 countries, not just travel advisors and gay guest houses, but cruise lines, airlines, mainstream hotels, travel media and tour operators, you name it. Anybody that's touching the travel industry that is welcoming to LGBT travelers are people we work with and try to promote through our outlets around the world. But we are still based here. We have a foundation now, which you've been very involved with, where we're trying to support our business members and the tourism industry with 3 key areas: research, education, and leadership for the next LGBT professionals out there. And you mentioned our convention. That's even though we sound grandiose, we're quite small and a small budget and small staff. But the convention is a third of our budget, and obviously not having it this year is really challenging for us from a financial perspective. But also the convention gives an opportunity every year for us to get together with our members from all over the world for those face-to-face interactions. We had really amazing speakers lined up. You were going to be interviewing Selena Jaitley from India on her engagement as a UN LGBT ambassador, or ambassador to LGBTQ people in India. And then we had leaders in tourism within Italy, within Europe, and all over the world that we're going to be speaking on trends and what's happening out there. We had a lot of LGBT organizations within Italy that were very involved with our convention. So it's really sad to see all that go, because Italy, like some of the other places we've had conventions like South Africa, is an emerging LGBT community. Milan is very, forward, but not all of Italy is as progressive as Milan. So it
is a pretty conservative environment.
Yeah, and it was going to bring, a lot of media and light to LGBT business at our convention, because it is a business conference at the end of the day. But as you mentioned, we weave human rights into it, particularly in places like we would in Africa or Italy. And it was going to be a great convention. As a tourism conference, destinations really roll out the red carpet for our attendees because they want to impress the travel advisors, they want to impress the leaders in tourism and travel media. Like our opening event was going to be at the Castle Sforzesco, which was built in the 1400s, and the mayor, who is really supportive of our community, would have been speaking there. So it's a great loss, but we are working with Milan to bring the convention back. It's looking like it would be 2022. 2021 will be in Atlanta, and then 2022. So we're hoping to keep Milan in the rotation and bring the world to Milan in 2 years.
Yeah. Well, that's one of my favorite places. So I look forward to seeing you there in 2022. John, so one thing that is fascinating is that in the middle of all of this, you've been running a survey. And by the way, we have been running a few polls on the side of discussion. There is one question about whether people are planning to travel once restrictions are lifted. And then I created another poll when we were discussing, John, in which I asked who among the two of us has the best quarantine haircut. And so far you're winning. But
what?
Which one of the two of us has the best quarantine haircut?
Clearly, I won that one.
Yeah, right now you have 3 votes and I have 0. But I
have 3 times as many votes. That's pretty impressive.
But I'm hoping that this is going to change over time. So what I was saying is that you did run a survey among LGBT travelers globally.
Yes.
On what were their travel plans in the aftermath of the epidemic. So, or at least of the confinement period. So I would love if you could. I know that the result just came back, so you probably did not have time to do a full-scale analysis. But I would love to hear if you could tell us some of the highlights of the survey.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share it. This is the first place we're sharing it, actually. So it did just close, and being that we had it in 6 languages, there was a lot of compiling to do. And then some of our questions were matched with mainstream travel organizations gauging post-COVID desires to travel. So matching those up. But I've got a good amount of data I can share. We received over 15,000 responses from the people that identify as LGBTQ+. from around the world. The majority of the samples came from very specific countries, the United States, Brazil, Canada, France, Mexico, and UK. So we will be doing deep dives into each of those and working with the communities in those countries to give out some of the data as well. But we'll be sharing all of the data in the coming week. But I'd say the most noteworthy point was that the clear majority, 66% of the survey respondents said they would feel comfortable with non-essential leisure travel before the end of 2020. So that's really encouraging to hear. But let me go into some of the specifics. The survey was done over the last 3 weeks. And these responses were collected through our networks around the world, as well as some of our members sent it out to their clients, our media partners, social media, etc. So 75% of the respondents identified as gay male. So this is skewing very heavily on the gay male versus the other parts of LGBT. 56% respondents claim to be a primary residence in the United States. So a lot of this is heavily US based. 80% are between the age of 25 and 64. And nearly half, 50%, said they will not change the type of destination they choose to visit after the coronavirus situation is resolved. So that's really interesting. And 25% of the respondents said they're still undecided. So only 28% said they would change their destination choices. So that reflects a high degree of destination loyalty amid the uncertainty. And as I mentioned, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that 2/3, 66% said they would travel before the end of 2020. I think that's really encouraging for our industry. And then the second set of items I would share was on the questions of likelihood of doing these activities in the next 6 months, so before the end of November. And the first couple are compared to a study that was done by MMGY Travel Intelligence, who were hired by US Travel. So this is for mainstream US versus LGBT US. So 48% of LGBT respondents plan to stay in a hotel or resort before the end of November, compared to 33% of the mainstream American respondents. 57% plan to take a domestic leisure trip before the end of November, compared to 33% of mainstream Americans. And 29% plan to take an international trip before the end of November, compared to only 18% of the mainstream Americans polled by MMGY and US Travel. Then the rest of these are just from our survey of LGBT travelers, because it was more global in scope, so we don't have a measurement on mainstream global. But 20% plan to visit an amusement park, so that could be like a Disneyland or Disney World, for example. 45% plan to take a short-haul flight before the end of November. 35% plan to take a medium-haul flight, and 27% plan to take a long-haul flight. 33% plan to attend an LGBTQ Pride event before the end of November. So that's really encouraging. Of course, all the ones in June have been either turned virtual, canceled, or delayed till end of the year. So hopefully there are still, some destinations like Atlanta, Palm Springs, many others do it in the fall. So there's still opportunity later this year to attend a Pride event. And then Harris Interactive, along with Whittick Communications, Bob Whittick in Washington, D.C., recently did a survey as well, one that applies for Lori and for the cruise line industry. The question is a little bit different, so I'm doing it separately, but it's whether traveling or not in the near term, LGBT respondents reported feeling more comfortable than the mainstream in making a choice for a cruise. 31% of LGBT respondents felt more comfortable taking a cruise versus 23% of non-LGBT. So again, all these stats really show that the travel industry really needs to look to LGBT travelers as an immediate source for business. I think I know I personally can't wait to get on my next flight and go somewhere. And I think, we've always known anecdotally, like post 9/11, post the terrorist attack in Nice. It was always the LGBT community that first got out to go to the restaurants, to go to Broadway, and to do things. So some of this data now I think is really good to prove, the resilience of the community post-COVID. Did I lose you?
Fabrice, you're muted.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Sorry about that. I was like the noise of my children.
Did I just say all those stats and nobody's listening?
No, we can hear. We can hear.
But John, I have to say that first of all, it's fascinating to see there is a higher intention of traveling among LGBT travelers than in the rest of the population. And as you mentioned, it does make sense, both on the aspect of the fact that LGBT people, cannot always rely on their family, on their close family to have a social interaction. So probably the desire to go to restaurants, the desire to go to Broadway, the desire to travel is also the fact that we have suffered from the confinement maybe more than the rest of the population. And then the other aspect is the resilience of the community, which you describe, which is that it's a community that is, to some extent, and it might be sad to say, but is used to, even in difficult circumstances, rally and find joy and optimism, obviously, because of what we have gone through over the years.
Correct.
So, there's two things that I would be interested to ask you. One of them is, you talked about destination loyalty. What are the hot LGBTQ destinations these days? And then my second question, which of course you probably do not, you don't have a crystal ball, but I would be interested to know if you believe that prices are going to go up because of the cost of the crisis, or if you think that prices are going to go down because the industry will try to lure in consumers to come back.
The second one is a very interesting question. I don't have a crystal ball, of course, but I tend to think, depending on what segment you're looking at, airlines through COVID were incredibly inexpensive. You could fly from here to LA on Delta for $26, which is unbelievable. But now that people are starting to get back onto flights, and with limiting the amount of seats they're selling per aircraft, it could cause the prices to go up. But to answer your and it would be different with hotels. I think it's per destination as well, trying to lure people back in. But as far as hot destinations, I do get asked that a lot from travel media. I would probably revert to prior to COVID to really know better. But cruising obviously is one, if not the top search item on our website. And there's all types of cruising. There's there's the large ships, there's the small ships, there's the charters, small groups, just individual on regularly published itineraries, river cruises. So there's a lot of options just within that segment. New York City is always a top, usually the number one or number two destination searched on our website. But other popular mainstay, kind of highly searched regular places year after year, places like Provincetown, Miami, San Francisco, LA and Palm Springs, and then like in Europe, London and Madrid are always top searches. But some of the new places, we're seeing a lot of traffic for interest in Colombia and Mexico. Mexico has some wonderful destinations. In Europe, Croatia and Slovenia have been doing a lot. Slovenia in particular for the LGBT community reaching out. In Europe as well as Israel is a hot destination. And Iceland also. I think looking over at Asia, the most traffic typically is for looking at Japan and Thailand. And we've seen some bumps in Guam, which is interesting, but I think has to do with the marketing that they're doing as a destination. And then South Africa is always a top, very highly searched destination on our website, for safaris as well as city experiences, wineries. There's a lot, there's a lot to be offered in South Africa. It's a long haul for most everyone, but it's one of those destinations you get there and you're just wowed.
Yeah, I kind of recognize myself, John, because I would love to go to Provincetown in August, and then next year if I can, I would love to go to Japan. Japan was one of, I went briefly. I actually met one of the IGLTA contact in Tokyo, and he took me around, and it's one of my best memories. But I didn't spend enough time. So
it is an amazing country, amazing culture. We have tour operator members and travel advisors doing unique excursions with small groups, really all over the world, and from adventure to cultural.
What is fascinating too about Japan is that the gay culture is so different and specific than the Western LGBT culture. So that was a fascinating aspect. So Laurie, John was mentioning that airplanes are selling less tickets, and they even went as far as having an empty seat in between travelers. So when you talk about safety and security on the boats, what is going to change for the cruise traveler when he steps on the boat? Are there going to be restriction on congregating in certain places? Have you started to think about what the post-COVID? I mean, we will still be cautious. What is going to take place on the boat that is different from the past?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, and we have a team of experts. We're working with the CDC, we're working with CLIA, which is Cruise Lines International Association. We're working with WHO, all sorts of government officials, all sorts of experts in anything you can imagine, from the research to the cleanliness to diseases to you name it. And there's all these different experts with very different opinions, depending on what it is you're trying to understand. And what we've realized over the last couple of months is that it's really key to work together. And all these experts have really had to become an allied force. And we know that there will be social distancing. We know that there will be things that we'll do on board the ship, and we'll have preparedness for if something were to happen and someone were to get sick on the ship in a different way than we've had in the past. Cruising today has been one of the cleanest and most secure ways to travel, with hospitals on board and health protocols and cleanliness protocols that are far ahead of where hotels and restaurants before COVID were. So now we're going to have to go to a lot of extra steps to make sure that, again, that guest feels confident, that the guest feels comfortable, and the safety and security, of course, of all involved. So we know social distancing will be a part of it. While I don't have any details, I can tell you that about a month ago, we actually trademarked the name C-Face for apparently a mask that we will have. I don't have details because it hasn't been shared, because I know as a company what we want to do is we want to come out with a full story from beginning to end, from when you board and before you come to our ships, what we'll need you to do protocol-wise. There will be things we'll ask of you and have you do as you prepare to come to a ship. There will be things you do when you arrive at the cruise ship terminal, as far as security measures and distancing. I don't know this, but my guest tells me that temperature checks and things like that will be a part of things. Once you get on board, of course, the way we cruise, we will very likely not sail with full ships. Pre-COVID, a full ship at 100% wasn't even considered full. We would go above 100% in our capacity with third and fourth guests in a stateroom. We probably will not see that kind of filling the ships to that capacity. I don't know when, if ever, but certainly not early on. We will probably go with ships that are not going to be sold full, so that we know we can be comfortable and make sure our guests are comfortable. And then, of course, you have to think about the destinations. And this is what's really interesting. We can control what happens when you board, what happens while you're on a ship. But once we take you to a destination, we don't know what's happening there, who's healthy, who's not there. So it's very likely that you'll see us leverage and use some of our private island destinations that we own, so that we know what we'll be encountering when we get to a port of call. So it's all these things that you would normally never really think much about that will become very, very important as we look to go back to sailing again. So we're excited about it. We're making our plans, we're doing our research, and we feel like when that time is right, we're going to be ready to deliver an amazing cruise experience.
Yeah, so I you know, it's great to hear, and I love the fact that you're developing CMAP. I mean, that sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was also thinking is that my parents are in their 70s, and in France, you know, there is different restriction based on age groups, meaning that if you are at an age where you're more vulnerable, you are asked to deconfine in a slower manner than the rest of the population. And I think it's a bit a question that is both for you, John and Laurie. Do you think that travelers are now going to be younger, meaning, you know, people that are in very healthy and young will be less at risk of being affected by COVID-19?
Maybe in the short term, but I don't know. I think there's so many people in the older generations that love to travel, love to take cruises. I think it'd be a very short blip if that is the case.
And you know, John, I agree with you. In fact, CLIA had put out some standards that if you were 70 and above, that you actually had to have special permission from a doctor to be able to cruise. That has been lifted. That is no longer in place, thank goodness. But you know, I think of my in-laws who are in their 70s and in France, and they live to travel. I mean, all they do is plan their next trip when they're on their current trip. And I think it's going to depend on your health overall. I don't think age is really going to be the factor, but I think you are going to need to consider your state of health, at least in the near future, to be comfortable to travel. So I don't think age will really rank as much as overall health.
Yeah, so my mom was supposed to be here in May to visit her grandchildren, and I know that she cannot wait to come back and see them. So, you know, she will be doing the Paris-New York as soon as the planes are flying.
Laurie brought up a really good point too, because you know the cruise lines sometimes get a bad rap, you know, because it's in the news when something happens with somebody gets sick, but they really do an awful lot to ensure the ships are clean and sanitized. It just gets so much media attention if somebody does get sick, but they've always done a really good job. So you know, if they're doing more beyond that, kudos to them. I think, you know, part of our role is really helping to elevate that message to LGBT travelers, like look what the royal brands are doing, because I think, you know, short of a vaccine, that's really what people are going to be basing which cruise line they go on or which airline, you know, who's doing what to ensure that I have a healthy, you know, safe experience. Because I'm going to travel, but I'm going to pick who's doing the most. So it's really getting that messaging out there in the programs that everyone's implementing.
Yeah, so John, I'll give you a quick update on the poll about our haircut, and 75% of respondents think you have the best quarantine haircut, and only 25% think I have the best quarantine haircut. You know, but I think the lighting in my apartment played a role.
Well, I think your lighting probably helped you get that 35%.
35. Okay, great. So now, you know, one thing that I also alluded to, Laurie, is that there was a lot of confusion in the communication at the beginning of COVID-19 about what was really happening, how is the virus being transmitted, what people should do. And that's not only in the United States, it was the same thing in France. I think a lot of people complained that they were not getting enough direction on when they can do this, when they can't, and what does it mean to be confined. So in your opinion, does the government and maybe, you know, industry coalitions like IGLTA have a role to play in having a dialogue with the consumer over, you know, what they can do, when they can resume travel, and meaning that, you know, RCCL cannot do the entire job of communicating with the traveler. And what are you expecting the government will do to support tourism as the months go by?
Well, it's interesting. I love your question because I think the government will require a lot of us. And that is something that we are glad to do. We're proud of our safety standards, and we're proud of the measures we're taking now, that we want people to feel confident. And if the government's going to govern that, we know the CDC in our case is governing that. We are happy to oblige. We will oblige, because in the end, it's about consumer confidence. If the consumer isn't confident to come back, there won't be anything we can say or do. And that leads me to answering the next part of your question, which is the IGLTA, or being here with you all today. We are stronger together. We need a common voice, all talking about travel and tourism, and how safe it can be, and how joyful it can be. And we want a voice, and we want to share our voice with you all, and we're going to lean into the support that you all provide. You know, in fact, Royal Caribbean, we're global partners with the IGLTA, and we believe in the organization and what it represents, and we find a lot of common ground there. So we will definitely, when we have the details of the story to tell, which, as you clearly can tell today, we don't have all of that, but once we do have those details and we have our story of how we are going to come out of this crisis and be ready to sail, we will want to tell the world and shout it from any mountaintop we can, because we cannot wait to be back in service and wait to welcome our guests. So it's definitely a team effort that we'll be looking for.
And everything seems to change like weekly. I mean,
daily.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to keep up with everything, but it's definitely changing rapidly.
So, John, you mentioned that the high point of every year for IGLTA is the convention. Sadly, it did not take place this year. I have to say, I didn't mention it when you were talking about it, but I remember an amazing session. I particularly remember a session in which a trans leader from, I think, New York City talked about what is her experience traveling, and the fact that she's a big traveler, but she has to navigate inland hurdles. I remember that she talked about TSA, and so that was fascinating.
And international travel, every country is so different with the way they do security and checks. And
yeah, that was great. I also remember an amazing session and discussion around boycotts, a call for boycotts of destination, which sometimes is a bit of in the LGBTI equality way, we jump on an opportunity to boycott. And so the discussion at the time was on Bermuda, because there was a bit of a misunderstanding of what had happened when Bermuda had banned same-sex marriage for a short period of time. And you had this huge call for boycott, and someone from the Bermuda tourism industry, who happened to be gay, had come to explain why boycotts are helpful, and in that particular case were misguided. So those conventions are also an opportunity to have amazing conversation and advance.
It's a difficult topic, like you said, because there's a large contingent in the broader LGBT community that says, I'm not spending my money where everything's not 100% to my satisfaction. But when you're working on a global scale and you're trying to make progress, it doesn't happen overnight. But we are at IGLTA the only LGBT organization that's a member of the United Nations World Tourism Organization. So we do have a seat at the table there, which is fascinating for conversation and for policy. But things don't happen overnight. And when you boycott, or when someone boycotts a destination, I get it, but you're hurting LGBT people within that destination or within that corporation or that industry as well. So even though you say, like Jamaica is a typical one, I won't go on a cruise that stops in Jamaica, or I won't fly to Jamaica, or things like that. There is a thriving LGBT community in Jamaica, and it's a challenging place to be LGBT, but they are there and they're trying to survive, and they want us to visit and to support them. It's a tough one, but it's the bigger picture in the long term that we're in the fight for.
Yeah, and I think one of the answers that we also had at the time was that the situation is rarely black and white.
Exactly.
The thing that my organization has been working a lot towards is showing the support of the private sector for employment protection for LGBT Americans. And very often, we forget that here in the United States, we do not have a federal protection when it comes to employment for LGBTI people, while the vast majority of countries that are supportive of LGBT rights have similar protection. Then similarly, many places in the world, like Brazil, have banned conversion therapy a long time ago, and we still have conversion therapy legal in many states in the United States. So sometimes it's a bit easy to make a split between good countries and bad countries. What is certain is that some countries have progress to make, and we should always reiterate that criminalization of homosexuality is a huge impediment to LGBT equality. And today there is still a great number of countries that unfortunately criminalize homosexuality. But I have to say that the support of private companies in showing that they believe that human rights of LGBT people should be respected has also a huge impact. And when we were talking about Japan, I am convinced that the fact that the Japanese private sector is starting to show that they believe it is time for marriage equality is a good sign that things are going to change in Japan, which is the only country in the G7 that doesn't have yet a countrywide recognition of same-sex couples. And that's how social change happens. If we have one lesson from the past, is that boycotts of specific countries tend to not really function. And then besides that, they affect negatively the population, but they also affect negatively LGBT workers and employees.
And it always tends to start with the tourism industry too, as the industry that is boycotted versus other industries in a country, because I think it's such a tangible way of not spending your money. But we have LGBT travel professionals in our mix at IGLTA in 82 countries, and certainly a lot of those countries are extremely challenging for LGBT citizens, but they are surviving, and they will make sure that you have a safe and welcoming travel experience if you want to go there. So to boycott them, is not in the best interest of members of our community around the world.
I agree. And I have to say that, something that you can do is you can spend your money with companies that are friends of the community. And Royal Caribbean is a good example.
Exactly.
Of a company that has taken steps to stand with the community in its legal fights, in its fight for social change. It's a company that employs LGBTI workers and ensure that they have dignity and opportunity in the workplace. And to me, that's something that I always pay attention to when I'm spending my money. Is that I want to spend my money and invest, my money. I don't have much to invest, but a little bit I have to invest with companies that are standing with our communities. And I think that sometimes this positive reinforcement is probably more important than the boycott of a specific brand or a specific destination. So I love the fact that we had to talk about this.
And we want to support the corporations that are supporting our community, because we wouldn't be able to do it without them. Both what you said from the product, but when you said politically, they're helping push agenda as well for LGBT rights, because they have employees and they have customers that are in our community. So we couldn't do it without the mainstream big corporations as well, partnering with us.
So, one of the things that you mentioned, John, and that's kind of a question for you and Laurie, is the fact that Pride is, is canceled this year, physical Pride. So my organization is actually launching Proudly Resilient, which is 30 days of events and performance around Pride in June. I was wondering, John, if you had plans for Pride, and you, Laurie, if you had plans to mark the month of June, despite the fact that unfortunately for the first year since it started, we are not going to have a physical Pride for obvious reasons.
Well, for me, I mean, at IGLTA, we'll be promoting prides that are doing virtual, like you mentioned, that some of them are doing fundraisers online with DJs or, drag bingo, different things that we're trying to help help them get some money from travelers that would typically attend their Pride event. But we're hoping that, you know, the ones later this year around the world, that we can promote for people to travel to.
Yeah. What about you, Laurie? Will you send a message to all your LGBTI employees telling them that despite the ships being at the docks, Royal Caribbean still stand with them, and that you can't wait to see them back on the ship?
So we have so many ways we communicate with our crew, with our employees. I'm excited to share that we're hoping, nothing's official yet, but we're hoping, at least on the land-based side of things, to start looking at coming back to the office in a slow phase in June. So that will be great. And then on board, we're constantly communicating with the crew, whether they're still on the ships or headed home or at home. And we have had great activations on board our ships. We have been involved in local community events for the Pride event. So we're going to do our best to be as supportive and involved, whether it's on land, at sea, or of course communicating with our employees, because it's an important piece of who we are. So we're going to do our best, but it's all going to be very virtual and or kind of ad hoc as we go. But we're definitely committed to being represented and participating.
Well, that's great. And, you know, you should check out proudlyresilient.com, which is a website that we launched for Pride, and you know, we hope we will see you there. So I have to say, you know, that I'm a Frenchman, so I have a tendency to be extremely negative and pessimistic, and so it has been a great time to spend an hour with people that see the silver lining in this crisis, and see that things can come back to normal in the near future. And you know, I love the fact that we talked about hot destination, John, because it kind of triggered my own appetite to get out of my apartment after more than 68 days stuck with my kids cooking pasta and rice. And you know, it's really amazing. I have to say that, you know, the community has very strong link with Royal Caribbean. IGLTA is a key institution also in our community. So there is nobody I would have rather spent this hour with than you two today. And you know, we will place that recording on YouTube to share with our corporate members and with our LGBTI members, so that we hope that they get the message that LGBTQ travel and tourism is open for business. And I hope we see you very soon. You know, at least we will be together in Milan in 2 years, John, but before that. And thank you again, Bruce, and I wish you a good Thursday and a good Memorial Day weekend.
It was nice to be here. Merci beaucoup.
Oh, wow, you're bilingual, John. That's amazing. You know, I'm kind of disappointed that you won the poll on the best haircut, but